Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management.
This episode of the New Stack Makers is sponsored by Twistlock. Twistlock is the most complete, automated, and scalable cloud-native cybersecurity platform. Purpose-built for containers, serverless, and other leading technologies, Twistlock gives developers the speed they want and the control they need. This is Libby Clark. I'm editorial director for the New Stack, and I'm here with Sonya Koptyev, who's the director of evangelism for Twistlock. We're at KubeCon. Can we talk for just a minute about what it means to be a cloud-native security tool? So what is it about cloud-native environments that requires a new approach to security?
Absolutely. So basically with cloud native, what we've seen is there's this huge explosion of different parts of the stack, right? And so what we mean by that is in traditional client and server architectures that we've seen in the last, several decades, it's been very siloed, right? So you would build out your front end, and then you would have your middleware layer, and then you would have your back end layer, and all of those different components had a very predictable, tightly coupled way of intercommunicating. Right? With cloud native technologies, it's completely different because you've got all of these different new microservices and pieces of your software that talk to each other in very unique and asynchronous ways, but there's exponentially more of them, right? And then there's exponentially more options of them with all of the different cloud native software providers that you can plug into. And then added on top of that, the complexity of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments, as well as still some folks are using on-premises and on-premises VMs that they're building themselves, right? And integrating still with some cloud native technology. So all of that really creates this exponential explosion of complexity as it relates to software development today.
And no neat, tidy boundary to monitor, right?
Oh gosh, no, because they all have to talk to each other to make the software function properly.
Yep,
right?
Yep. So Twistlock today just released a new version of your security platform.
Yes.
The 18.11 release. So can you tell us what your team focused on, what the development team focused on with this release, and what were some of the issues that you have seen kind of arise from your customers that you're trying to address with the release?
Absolutely. I think the biggest piece that we try to address with this release is really addressing all of those different components that our customers are using in their cloud native environments, right? So a major focus has been integrating Istio into Twistlock, which we'll get to as well, and service mesh architectures, and making that a reliable and secure part of the Twistlock monitoring and discovery platform, as well as Kubernetes service monitoring. And so with that, what we've added is the ability across multi-cloud environments and multi-services, and really addressing that same thing that we opened up with, which is regardless of what services you're using in whatever cloud provider, in whatever region, we give you a way to visually see exactly what it is that you're doing and where you could have some vulnerabilities or compliance issues in those environments. Along with also coming off of reInvent last week, we announced that we were AWS's Lambda Layers launch partner, which was super exciting, as well as integration with Security Hub and container compliance. And then also we launched Cloud Discovery, which is an OSS tool that's available for free for anyone to use to really dive into, as we like to call it, finding out the unknown unknowns of their cloud environment and their cloud native stacks, and really get a good sense of what services they're using.
So that was one of the intriguing parts of the release to me, was that discovery of the services you actually have in production.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a big problem? Most people, or a lot of companies, don't know what services cloud services they're using.
You'd be really surprised, but once you get beyond that couple of hundred employee mark, right, you've got folks that have all sorts of services that they're running that the security team may not know about, or their IT ops team doesn't know about, right? And with that, you introduce new vulnerabilities and threats into the environment just because the security team doesn't know about them, so they can't secure them.
So it's just the service discovery is just what are we using so that we can know if they announce a CVE, for example, that's something we want to pay attention to.
So there's two parts to that, right?
Yeah.
So Cloud Discovery is the free OSS tool that gives you just a JSON readout that's very simple to then ingest into your own security, whatever it is that you're doing. But as part of Twistlock and as part of the 18.11 release, that's actually baked in what we're calling Cloud Platform Compliance. And so from there, we give you a few layers on top of just what Cloud Discovery offers. So within Twistlock's radar view, we fully bake in that visualization to let you see across the entire landscape of your cloud stack, right? And all of the services that you're using and all of the different providers and service accounts and regions and absolutely everything, as well as identifying those key vulnerabilities that you may not know about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the big stories we've been following toward the end of the year is the resurgence of multi-cloud. As you mentioned, AWS reInvent had a lot of multi-cloud kind of announcements. And so enterprises are apparently embracing the concept that cloud native doesn't necessarily mean only in the cloud, that it can also mean on premises and across multiple types of clouds. With your announcement, I think that kind of reinforces this idea. I mean, that's something that you're seeing among Twistlock customers as well, I take it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is that we really meet customers where they are. So whether it is on-premises environments and VMs that they're running, or if they're, dipping their toe into containers as a service or functions as a service, or if they're going full bore and full in on, completely serverless and really very teeny tiny microservices that are talking to each other, we really help to secure across the board on all of those. And not only, up and down the stack, as I mentioned, right, depending on what different components you're using, but really what we like to do is shift security left. And by that, what we're saying is we really put the onus of security onto developers from the really, really early start of the application lifecycle. And so even in the build phase, so we like to talk about it as build, ship, and run, right? So in the build phase, we really make it very clear to developers exactly what vulnerabilities exist in the software that they're building as they're building it. And we give them the ability to not move on from that development phase until they've cleared all of those vulnerabilities and compliance checks. But also with security teams, that gives them the insights and ability to set thresholds on the developers to say, until you can clear these vulnerabilities and security thresholds, we can't publish that container into the container registry or that function into that function serverless repository, right? So we're with you from the very beginning of the development life cycle.
So how does that play then with multi-cloud? What's the connection there between, I guess, I don't want to call it screening, but in terms of just, giving developers those tools to find the vulnerabilities, the potential vulnerabilities before it even ships.
Yeah.
How do you do that across environments? I mean,
so we're fully integrated and fully support all the three major cloud providers, so AWS, GCP, and Azure. We are fully integrated into the various serverless components and pieces that they provide, so as well as their Kubernetes as a service, their containers as a service, functions as a service, so across that entire stack, as well as their managed Kubernetes platform, so EKS, AKS, and GKE, all of those integrate with Twistlock. Right. Okay. And so it doesn't matter what cloud you're on, even, as I mentioned, most of our customers are multi-cloud, and that's the reality today. And we can't just cover one. And so, we cover all of them.
Yep. Gotcha. Okay. So, I guess what is the unique challenge of multi-cloud then from a security perspective?
It's really, as I mentioned, with identifying all of the different services that you're running, right? Because you can't secure something if you don't know that it's out there. Also, all of them have different views. So you could go into GKE, right, and see all of your service accounts that are running there, but that doesn't tell you anything about, services that you might be running on AWS or Azure, right? And it's even harder when you plug in things like serverless because the functions are very ephemeral. Right. So we're there, and we understand from our long history of, cloud native compliance, with our CTO, John Morello, having written, or co-authored, the NIST guide for container security, right? We have a long-standing history of really understanding what cloud native security means across the various clouds.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the service mesh component then. The
Sure.
Istio component, because you had said that that was something that a challenge that your customers were facing. I mean, are your customers already in production with service mesh? Is it something they're testing out? Where are they on the adoption cycle? And yeah.
So I think everyone's fairly early on with Istio and service meshes, but we do know that roughly, based on the CNCF survey, there's roughly 17% of cloud native companies, if you will, that are running Istio in production. So that's a fairly sizable percentage considering how new it is in the marketplace, but it's definitely one of the most interesting new technologies in the space.
By cloud native company, how would you define that?
Sorry, companies that are building cloud native solutions.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So we had a podcast earlier with Alexis Richardson from WeWorks, and we're talking about some of the security challenges that cloud native presents. And so, how can a service mesh like Istio, I mean, can that be considered a security solution on its own? What are the benefits for security of that project in particular? And then taking a step further, then what are the benefits with Twistlock?
Sure, absolutely. So Istio really helps to simplify the way that folks leverage some of these running of microservices, right? It was difficult in the past with different aspects of running microservices because you didn't necessarily have built-in load balancing, which Istio offers, or fine-grained traffic routing between your microservices. There wasn't TLS everywhere, right? Which does start to bring in the security aspects of those things. And then Istio also provides service-centric RBAC. Right, so all of these are great advancements, and that's what makes service mesh even more, advantageous for folks to use in their microservices environments. Now, with this particular release and with 18.11 and Twistlock integrating with Istio, what we add on top of that is actually visibility into how all of those microservices and all of those different components of your Istio environment and service mesh interconnect, right? And visually showing that off in Radar along with the rest of your cloud native stack.
Okay, so that's not built into Istio. That's not something that you can get out of the box.
Exactly.
Necessarily. Okay.
Exactly. And also on top of that, we're really including the industry's first set of compliance and security configuration checks for Istio, which is net new, right, from anyone.
Yeah, this is actually something that I've just learned about, is this idea of a service mesh orchestrator, something that you manage service mesh with, or that you manage, you use to manage a service mesh.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering if that's something that you consider this piece of Twistlock being as like a service mesh orchestrator or some sort of management tool first, or is it more of a visualization dashboard tool?
I would say it's more of the visualization dashboard tool, but giving you visibility, not necessarily into the orchestration part of it, but we definitely learn from it, right? So the first thing Twistlock does when you turn it on in any part of your cloud stack is we learn what normal behavior looks like, right, across your various pieces and components. And that includes service meshes, right? So we understand what the different microservices are doing, what protocols they're using to do it, what service accounts they're using to do it, what standard access those service accounts have to the different microservices, right? So we have all of that visibility. And then layered on top of that, we then add our over 300 plus vulnerability and compliance checks.
So I would imagine, though, that having that visibility is sort of essential for the management of it, right?
Well, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I think you could sit there reading through JSON files, or you could just very clearly see, some color-coded boxes that tell you, hey, this crimson-colored box here you should probably address. So
how much of that then can be automated?
Yeah.
Because that's something that actually John Morello was writing about on the new stack.
Yes.
About the ability to, or the benefit of a service mesh for, being, because it is in the software, the application layer, being able to manage it like software.
Yes.
Declaratively. So what is the capability then for automation?
Well, with automation as far as vulnerability detection and mitigation, or which part of it?
I guess there's both of it. There's
Right.
and maybe on Twistlock's end, it's more about the detection and scanning component than it is on the actual making policy.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is
Yeah.
both, right? And so basically what we do is we have a set of compliance checks that you could then checkbox and apply to your various pieces of your deployment. But then also we have the real-time monitoring and mitigation for threats as they happen. And so with Incident Explorer, you can dive in, and once we detect anomalous behavior, we'll actually flag that as an incident. And then using the forensics data, because we track absolutely every bit of communication and command that happens as your container is executing, you can actually dive into the layers in depth and see exactly what, someone who could potentially have hijacked your container, what commands they're running and how they're running it, and ports and things like that. So it's very much real time, and also with the ability to shut that down, right? So if we do detect some anomalous behavior and your compliance rules say shut it down, if you detect this, then we'll stop that from running and potentially seizing your entire environment.
Is that are you actually storing that information and able to access it later?
The forensics data?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a full forensics Explorer, Incident Explorer, we call it, that you can go through and see exactly what's being executed.
Interesting.
So you could then provide that, to your point about automation, you can either roll that into, obviously it's audited everywhere, but then you can give that to your security team so that they can analyze that further and determine where potentially some of those threats, but we call that out pretty clearly to say, that these vulnerabilities were found in your environment, and then you can address them ahead of time so you don't get into that. But if we do sense an incident, you can pass that along for further investigation by your security team or your IOPS teams, IT ops teams.
So there's almost like a logging and tracing component to it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about the recent Kubernetes CV.
Yeah.
That was, we wrote about it on the New Stack last week.
Yep.
So with this, critical vulnerability.
Yep.
Is that something that with the new 18.11 with the new Twistlock tools that you could detect?
Absolutely.
And can you tell me a little bit about how that would work?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So really at the core, it's exploitation of privileges. That's what that CVE was, where certain unprivileged requests weren't fully terminated, and so that allowed elevation of privileges. So in simple terms, what that means is somebody didn't log out, and so they were able to exploit that, right, and then elevate privileges potentially. Now that has been patched in Kubernetes in versions 1.10, 11, and 12, right? So first step would be go and update your Kubernetes deployment. But with Twistlock, we really see security as being always about defense in depth, right? And so there's 3 top ways that we would have mitigated that risk for this particular CV. The first one is really vulnerability management. And so we do identify anything in the OpenShift nodes, so you can easily see the vulnerabilities, but also non-Red Hat Kubernetes distributions as they patch and actively release CV notifications and patches. We're pulling that into the Twistlock intelligence stream and then applying it to your entire environment and calling out exactly where we identify that CVE being present and how you can mitigate it. So to your point, yes, absolutely. First and foremost would be the visibility to know exactly where that vulnerability exists in your environment, right? So knowing is the first step. Number 2, it would be compliance checks for any kind of anonymous access. Now, obviously, this wasn't an anonymous access type of exploitation, but that's definitely a first step to mitigating anybody exploiting any kind of access, right, is really shutting down anonymous access. So we give you visibility in your environment to understand where you do have anonymous access enabled, but also making that part of the compliance checks to call it out if you haven't shut it down yet. And then third is really this runtime defense that we've just been talking about, is the Incident Explorer capability, right, where we're explicitly designed to provide a backstop for any kind of exploitation that can happen in your environments, and identifying the unpredictable anomalous activities. So after we scan your environment and all of your different microservices and have a good understanding of what normal behavior looks like, right? So how do your microservices talk to each other? What ports do they use? What protocols do they use, right? We get a good sense of what's normal activity. And then anytime we see anomalous behavior, there are some rules and checks that, you would put in place to say, okay, when you see something like this that's anomalous and we're not expecting, shut it down, right? Make sure that it can't exploit anything in the environment that would be along the lines of this particular vulnerability or this particular type of anomalous behavior. And so then, going back to this forensics feature, you would have, we would shut down that container, but then you would have the forensics data to go back to really understand how that was able to be exploited in your environment.
So in addition to monitoring and kind of seeing how things are functioning already, then you're able to be proactive about it.
Exactly.
In an automated way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if it goes so far as, a blacklist of commands. So if somebody does attempt to run a command that's explicitly listed on the blacklist, that container will be shut down. Right, and you'll be alerted. And so that's another set of new capabilities that we released with 18.11 is really integration into AWS Security Hub and a bunch of other alerting providers like PagerDuty and IBM Security Advisor, even giving you the ability to plug in generic webhooks. So if you're using your own, own alerting mechanism, you can plug in with webhooks and get alerted that way, or PagerDuty and Prometheus as well, right? So regardless of what tool you're using, and this goes back to one of the major, foundational components of and driving forces behind this release is whatever components you're using, we're going to be integrated with them and give you the most flexibility in your security alerting and monitoring and all of that across your stack.
So I guess that goes then to the idea, coming back full circle to the definition of cloud native. I guess we started this conversation with a discussion of what makes for a cloud native tool, and it really sounds like it's not just in the cloud, but on premise, and then giving you flexibility to in your tools as well. It's not what's the saying I'm looking for?
It's not siloed.
Yeah, it's not siloed. Yeah. And so I know that then with all of this kind of abundance of tooling and different environments that you can run things in, that there's also an abundance of complexity.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is, who's in charge of creating the security automation? You mentioned the role of the developer, making sure that from the very beginning that they're getting notified from vulnerabilities and their potential vulnerabilities in their code.
Yep.
So how can what's the role of the developer in this? How can they track policies? How can they make sure that once their code is put into production, that it's not going to come back to them?
Yeah. So I think traditionally security aspects of software development have been seen as a lob on at the end, right? It's kind of like that last check before you ship into production, and security has to okay it, and then you're good to go. Yeah. What we're seeing with cloud native, to your point, is really it needs to be pulled back, and it needs to be a collaborative effort. So to your question about who's responsible, it's really everyone, right? It's the developers, it's the DevOps team, it's the IT ops team, it's the security team. Everybody has to be on the same page and understand how the different CVEs relate to their environment and the software that they're building, and then different compliance needs, because a piece of software that has to be HIPAA compliant and GDPR compliant and potentially PCI compliant, all of those have their own complexities as well, and really bringing the whole team in to make sure that it's a holistic approach to security is what Twistlock helps to foster. Right? So we help to make it across the board everyone's responsibility and not just a lob on at the end.
I guess that's the defense in depth part of it, right?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, the three phases, I guess.
The build, ship, run. Absolutely.
Build, ship, run.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Well, that was
awesome.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. This episode of the New Stack Makers is sponsored by Twistlock. Twistlock is the most complete, automated, and scalable cloud-native cybersecurity platform. Purpose-built for containers, serverless, and other leading technologies, Twistlock gives developers the speed they want and the control they need.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.